Welcome to the debate. Today, we're not just discussing a new theory. We are stepping onto the bleeding edge of a conceptual revolution. We're examining a framework that attempts to achieve the holy grail that, eluded Einstein in his final decades, the unification of quantum mechanics and general relativity. The topic is supersymmetric geometric quantum mechanics, or SGQM. But let's be clear right from the start. This isn't just another particle physics model adding a new particle to the zoo. It proposes a fundamental reimagining of spacetime itself as a 12-dimensional Aetheron manifold.
And reimagining is putting it mildly. The central question we're grappling with today is, it's fundamental. Are the forces we know, gravity, electromagnetism, the nuclear forces, are they truly distinct interactions? Or are they, as SGQM suggests, merely orthogonal projections of a single rotating geometric lattice? I'm approaching this with a heavy dose of skepticism. We're talking about a debate between the most successful theory in history, the Standard Model, and a view that replaces propagating fields with geometric synchronization.
That is the conflict. And at the heart of this discussion are the rotational mechanics of a modified Pythagorean framework, the cryptic nature of the 8-pi factor in physics, and, maybe the most provocative claim of all, the non-propagation hypothesis.
Right, and that's where I suspect we're really going to lock horns. I mean, while geometric unification is mathematically seductive, everyone loves a neat equation, the idea that light doesn't actually travel through space, well, that requires a burden of proof that is frankly staggering.
I appreciate that stance. My position, though, is that SGQM offers a deterministic, a geometrically elegant solution to the singularity problem that currently breaks general relativity. By replacing forces with rotational synchronization, we dissolve the artificial barriers between the quantum world and the cosmic scale.
And I'll argue that while a geometry is internally consistent, replacing the Standard Model's gauge bosons with geometric phase realignments risks discarding the entire causal structure of relativity. So I'm looking for falsifiability. I want to see where this theory crashes into reality, specifically regarding predictions about LIGO and gravitational echoes.
Then let's dive into the core thesis. To understand SGQM, we have to stop viewing the universe as a void containing particles. That's a Newtonian hangover. Instead, SGQM posits a living geometric field called the Aetheron. And the foundation of this is the Aetheron theorem, which is really a dynamic modification of the Pythagorean theorem. We all learned a squared plus b squared equals c squared in school. In this framework, it's formalized as alpha squared equals mu squared plus e rot squared.
Okay, let's decode that for the listeners. So you have mu representing mass, and E rod is rotational energy. And alpha is what exactly?
Alpha is the conserved geometric invariant. Think of it as the hypotenuse of the triangle. And here is the crucial conceptual leap. Mass and rotational energy are not separate physical entities. They are orthogonal projections, literally the legs of a right triangle of this unified rotational state alpha.
So you're saying that if I look at this Aetheron object from one angle, I see mass, and if I look from, 90 degrees offset, I see energy?
Precisely. The orthogonality, that 90-degree relationship, is what explains the dual boson structure. Matter and force are preserved not through particle exchange, but through geometric rotation. When the triangle rotates in a higher dimensional space, energy shifts from the mass leg to the energy leg. It's a seesaw. But the length of the seesaw, the invariant alpha, that never changes.
I admit there is an elegance to that. It creates a closed system where mass and energy are just different viewing angles of the same object. It kind of reminds me of the relationship between electricity and magnetism, two sides of the same coin. However, I have to pull the emergency brake at the non-propagation hypothesis that stems from this. Standard physics relies on the idea that information, light, gravity, it travels through space at a finite speed, c. SGQM seems to claim nothing is actually moving from point A to point B.
That's a common sticking point, but let's reframe it. It's not that nothing happens, it's that the mechanism isn't travel, it's synchronization. The best analogy is a stadium wave. When you see a wave move around a stadium, do the people get up and run around the track?
No, obviously. They stand up and sit down in place.
Correct. They execute a local phase shift, standing up, and it's coordinated with their neighbors. SGQM argues that the Aetheron is a continuous lattice, much like those people in the stands. What we call propagation of a photon is actually a coordinated sequence of these phase shifts in the lattice structure.
But metaphors can be dangerous. In a stadium wave, the medium is the people. We know the people exist. We know their reaction time determines the speed of the wave. In your model, you're reinterpreting the speed of light c not as a velocity of a particle, but as a rate of rotational synchronization.
Yes, c is the update rate. It's the maximum speed at which the lattice can maintain its geometric coherence.
Okay, here's my problem with that. If c is just a lattice update rate, does that imply that c can vary? Because if you tell me the speed of light changes based on the density of these Aetheron knots, you're rewriting special relativity. Einstein's whole premise was that c is constant for all observers.
I understand the hesitation, but SGQM does predict that c is a geometric parameter that can fluctuate in high curvature environments, like near black holes. We assume c is constant because we live in a relatively flat, low-energy region of the universe, but let's hold that thought on c for a moment, because to understand why the lattice behaves this way, we need to talk about the mechanics. We need to discuss the dimensions.
Let's do that. Because earlier you mentioned 12 dimensions. The standard model gets by with significantly fewer, and string theory needs 10 or 11 depending on who you ask. Why 12? And specifically, explain this dual boson structure.
Well, the 12 dimensions arise because of the degrees of freedom required to model the rotation. In the standard model, fermions like electrons are matter particles with half-integer spin. Bosons are force carriers with integer spin. We treat them as totally different beasts. SQM asks, how do you construct a fermion?
Standard quantum mechanics says a spinner, a fermion, must rotate 720 degrees, or 4 pi, to return to its original state. That's a well-known, albeit weird, mathematical fact. If you turn an electron 360 degrees, it's not the same, it's inverted. You have to turn it another 360 to get back to normal.
Right. It's the plate trick or the built trick in topology. SGQM takes that 720-degree cycle and breaks it down into independent axes of rotation. We categorize them. You have the fermionic axes, R1 through R4. These govern mass and identity, essentially the inward phase loading of the knot.
Okay, so R1 through R4 make the particle look like a particle.
And then you have the bosonic axes, R5 through R8. These govern curvature and force, the outward oscillation. And here's the key. A fermion requires 2 full 360-degree rotations of these bosonic axes to complete one fermionic identity cycle.
So you're claiming that a fermion is, in a sense, a composite motion of bosonic axes?
Not composite in terms of gluing particles together, no. Composite in terms of geometry. The orthogonality, the 90-degree offset between these sets of axes, is what creates the distinction. When the rotational energy on the bosonic axis follows a sine wave, the mass term on the fermionic axis follows a cosine wave. This geometric projection creates the illusion of a propagating electromagnetic wave, but physically, it's a local oscillation of the Aetheron. The wave is just the visual trace of the Aetheron twisting in place.
That is complex. You're invoking 8 distinct rotational axes, R1 through R8, just to explain what Maxwell described with a few field equations. But I want to press you on a specific number that keeps coming up in the literature, 8 pi. In Einstein's general relativity, the field equations contain the factor 8 pi g. That 8 pi is there essentially to get the geometry of a sphere to match the energy density. It's a conversion factor. How does SGQM reinterpret this?
This is one of the strongest theoretical anchors of the model. In SGQM, 8 pi is not an arbitrary constant we insert to make the units work. It is a geometric necessity for topological closure.
Closure of the lattice?
Yes. We just discussed the 720-degree cycle for a single fermion.
But the Aetheron manifold as a whole, the synchronization of the entire system, requires a 1440-degree cycle, that is 8 pi radians.
Wait, so you were saying the 8 pi in Einstein's equations is actually a shadow of this 12-dimensional metacycle?
Exactly. The 8 pi factor represents the synchronization constant of the lattice. It's the bridge between the microscopic quantum spin, which operates on that 4 pi scale, and the macroscopic curvature of gravity. Gravity is just the large-scale manifestation of this 12-dimensional synchronization trying to close that 8 pi loop. The universe bends because the lattice is trying to complete its rotation.
I have to say, reducing gravity to the lattice trying to close a loop sounds a bit metaphysical. If gravity is just the lattice trying to balance itself, how do you explain the violent interactions we see? Black hole mergers, neutron-star collisions. These are cataclysmic events, not just a lattice tidying up its room.
But the violence is the rebalancing, and that brings us perfectly to the falsifiability. You ask for evidence, the non-propagation hypothesis and this lattice structure make very specific predictions that differ from general relativity. We don't have to just philosophize. We can look at the data. Let's talk about LIGO.
Okay, let's look at LIGO. We have observed gravitational waves from binary black hole mergers. The data fits general relativity beautifully. You have the in-spiral, the merger, and the ring down. It matches the template banks almost perfectly.
It fits well, but there's noise in the residuals. Standard GR predicts a smooth ring down after the merger. The black hole settles into a quiet sphere very quickly. SGQM predicts echoes.
Define echoes in this context.
Because gravity is a lattice reconfiguration, not just a ripple in a smooth void. A merger causes internal torsional feedback within the Aetheron structure. Think of it like striking a bell. If the bell is a perfect smooth sphere, it rings once and fades. But if the bell has internal structure, cracks, or lattice defects, you get reverberations, you get echoes.
So you're predicting that after the main chirp of the gravitational wave, we should see, what, secondary pulses?
Yes. High-frequency deviations or repeating pulses in the ring-down phase. These are signatures of a lattice restructuring itself.
I will admit, echoes in gravitational data are a subject of active debate. There are teams looking for them right now in the LIGO data body off Shorty. Others have claimed to see them, while the LIGO collaboration remains skeptical. If they were confirmed, it would suggest structure at the horizon scale, which classical GR denies. But finding noise in the data is one thing. Proving it's an Aetheron knot is a massive leap.
True. But there's a second prediction, one that's much easier to test and perhaps even more startling. It concerns Mercury.
Mercury's perihelion precession, the classic test. Newtonian physics failed to predict it by about 43 arcseconds per century. Einstein solved it by introducing the curvature of spacetime. He nailed the calculation. Are you suggesting Einstein got the right answer for the wrong reason?
I'm saying his calculation was a geometric approximation of a deeper mechanic. Einstein attributed the precession entirely to the curvature of spacetime caused by the sun's mass. SGQM attributes a portion of it to magnetic leakage.
Magnetic leakage? Mercury has a magnetic field, but it's incredibly weak, and the sun's magnetic field at that distance. How could that affect the orbit enough to matter? Standard GR says gravity is gravity. Magnetism doesn't change the orbital geometry directly like that.
Remember our axes. R6 is the electromagnetic coupling axis. R7 is the curvature coherence axis, gravity. In the Aetheron fiber, these axes are topological neighbors. SGQM predicts that the sun's massive magnetic sector, its R6 activity, induces a torsional drag on the curvature sector, R7.
Hold on. You are suggesting a direct coupling between electromagnetism and gravity. That's the holy grail of unification, but it's also strictly forbidden in the standard model. They don't mix.
SGQM says they mix via the lattice. And here is the test. SGQM predicts that Mercury's precession rate should correlate with the sun's magnetic flux variations.
As the solar cycle changes, solar maximum versus solar minimum, the torsional drag changes.
That is actually a brilliant test.
Isn't it?
It is, because it's strictly falsifiable. We have messenger data, we have Bepi-Colombo on the way. If we see a variation in the precession that tracks with the solar cycle, that would be very, very difficult for standard GR to explain without adding exotic new fields. Standard GR predicts a constant rate based on mass. If it wiggles with the magnetic field, Einstein's equations are missing a term.
Exactly. It would imply that the forces are not distinct. The magnetic leakage is just the lattice transferring rotational energy from the R6 axis to the R7 axis. It validates the living geometry of the Aetheron.
Okay, I see the logic, and I respect the boldness of the prediction. But let me pull us back to the theoretical foundation for a moment. You're relying heavily on this non-propagation idea. I want to revisit the stadium wave. If I look at a distant star, the photon I see left that star billions of years ago. In your model, that photon is what? A long chain of dominoes falling over?
In a sense, yes. It's a polarization wave. The Aetheron is a continuous lattice of these Pythagorean triangles. When an event happens at the star, it triggers a phase shift in the local lattice. That shift necessitates a rebalancing of the adjacent lattice cells to maintain the alpha squared invariant.
But that rebalancing still happens at C.
Yes, because C is the mechanical limit. It's the refresh rate of reality.
But this implies the universe is a solid block of Aetheron. We ruled out the luminiferous ether in 1887 with the Michelson-Morley experiment. They looked for the ether wind, the idea that as Earth moves through this fluid, the speed of light should change. They found nothing. Zero.
And I'm not convinced by that dismissal, because Michelson-Morley was looking for a fluid ether, something the Earth was moving through, like a boat through water. SGQM describes a geometric ether. We are moving through it, we are of it. Matter itself is just a stable, rotating knot in the lattice. You can't detect a wind if you are made of the wind.
That's a convenient philosophical pivot. You're essentially saying the detector and the thing being detected are part of the same frame of reference because they're both excitations of the same field.
Correct. And that's why the null result of Michelson-Morley is actually consistent with SGQM. The experiment assumed propagation through a medium. SGQM assumes projection of the medium.
I have to admit, the idea of rotational memory is poetic. If two particles are entangled, they share a single knot topology. Pulling one tightens the other instantly because they aren't two objects, they're two ends of the same rope.
Exactly. No signal needs to travel. The topology is one single object.
To summarize then, from my perspective, while the geometric derivation is mathematically seductive, using the Pythagorean theorem to derive the forces is indeed elegant. The burden rests on observing those specific deviations. We need to see those echoes in LIGO. We need to see the magnetic correlation in Mercury. Until then, the Aetheron remains a fascinating, complex hypothesis challenging the bedrock of propagation. I worry that abandoning the concept of fields traveling through space opens a door to causal paradoxes that this model hasn't fully resolved yet.
But that's the beauty of science. We don't have to agree on the premise to agree on the test. In my view, SGQM unifies the forces not by adding particles, but by recognizing them as different rotational modes of the same geometric invariant. And it gives us the echoes in the gravitational ringdowns and the magnetic dependence of Mercury's orbit as the keys to validation.
Agreed. Whether one believes in the Aetheron or standard curvature, we both agree that looking for scars or echoes in the fabric of spacetime is the next frontier.
It certainly is. And thank you for joining the debate.